Well, greetings. Pastor Eric here from Zion Lutheran Church in beautiful and windy Redmond. So we're inside again today and we're on day 5. And what I'd like to do over the next weeks is look at the 7 signs that Jesus did, then look at the 7 people, then look at the 7 I am statements. Maybe one a day, maybe some of them will take 2 days, but the signs, the people, and the I am sayings. There's a lot of different ways to go through the Gospel of John, chapter by chapter or theme by theme, but those groupings of 7 I think will be very helpful for us to go through. Once we get through those, then we'll look at the upper room, then we'll look at the crucifixion and death of Jesus. Now, in the first week of Jesus' life, John the Baptist's question for who he is in chapter 1, he points to Jesus as the Lamb of God. There's Andrew and John, and Andrew brings Peter. Jesus found Philip. Philip brought Nathanael. They travel to Cana. That all happens in chapter 1. It's a little bit of a convoluted chapter, so we're going to go to chapter 2, the first of his signs. This is the first week of Jesus' life in chapter 1 that John begins with the calling of his 6 disciples so far in chapter 1. And at the end of John's gospel, he covers the last week of Jesus' life. So in between there, he frames another framing technique of John, whereby he frames the first and the last week. Now, what's interesting is that Jesus, first thing he does in chapter 2, he goes to a wedding. I mean, he's got people to heal, he's got teachings, he's got all this, and he goes to a wedding. I mean, what's that about? Part of it is Jesus is on God's timetable, time frame in the Gospel of John. Jesus is less hurried in the Gospel of John than any of the other Gospels, especially the Gospel of Mark. Jesus just goes from one thing to the next. Mark has this, and immediately. Jesus does one thing after the other. But Jesus goes to a wedding as the first thing. Now, what's interesting about weddings at Jesus' time, weddings now focus on the bride. You know, she walks down the aisle and all the guys go, "Oh, don't she look good?" That's what they say in Wisconsin, "Don't she look good?" And weddings at Jesus' time, the groom was the one who was the focus, not the bride like now, but the groom was the focus. And weddings would take place over 3-4 days, sometimes a week. They'd go to the groom's house. They'd have a great big party. And Jesus goes to this wedding, first thing he does in chapter 2, with 6 of his disciples. And let me just read through the first part of chapter 2, where it goes like this. On the 3rd day, cling, cling, you start to think on the 3rd day. That's a sign in the Gospel of John that something's going to go on. Jesus is raised on the 3rd day. There are several references about the 3rd day through the Gospel of John that we'll see. There was a wedding in Cana in Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine gave out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." Jesus said to her, "Woman, what concern is that to you and me? My hour has not yet come." Focus on that. His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Now standing there were 6 stone water jars for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to them, "Fill the jars with water," and they filled them to the brim. He said, "Now draw some out and take it to the chief steward." So they took it. When the steward tasted the water that had become wine, he didn't know where it came from, though the servants who drew the water out knew. The steward called the bridegroom and said to him, "Everyone serves the good wine first, and then the inferior wine after the guests have become drunk, but you've kept the good wine till now." Jesus did this, the first of his signs in Cana of Galilee, and it revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. Remember why John wrote the gospel in chapter 20, verse 30? These things are written so that you might believe that Jesus is the Son of God, and that believing in him, you might have life in his name. So Jesus does his first sign, and the disciples believed in him right off the bat, fulfilling the purpose statement of the Gospel of John. So the third day, Jesus is at the wedding. Mary was there, but it doesn't mention Joseph. We don't know. Maybe he wasn't there. It might have been that he was quite a bit older when he and Mary got married, and he may have died by this point, because we don't hear about Joseph at all in the entire Gospel of John. Mary says to Jesus, they have no wine. Any good husband knows that when your wife says, the window's open, doesn't just mean the window's open and you don't go, yes it is. It means go close the window because it's getting cold in here. So when Mary says to Jesus they have no wine, it's kind of talk that you need to do something about this. Jesus and his mother have this exchange. Woman, what concern is that to you and me? My hour has not yet come. Woman is a term that Jesus also used on the cross when he said to Mary, woman, behold your son, behold your mother. So the woman is not just a way of using a dismissive title for Mary. It's kind of one of honor and respect. He says, my hour has not yet come. His hour, we'll see through the Gospel of John, is his hour on the cross, his glorification, when everything that he was on earth for will be completed. So what concern is that? What, in a sense, one commentary I read said that this was spoken gently, and it's kind of like saying, don't worry, you don't quite understand what's going on now. Leave it to me and I'll settle it in my own way. Jesus saying Mary should just leave it to me. I will deal with the situation. Now, the hour has not yet come. You don't have to write this down, but in chapter 7, verse 30, 8, verse 20, 12, verse 23, 13, verse 1, 17, verse 1, all relate to the hour. Jesus references that my hour has not yet come. His glorification, not the pain and suffering of Mark, but instead the glorification where Jesus says, as I said a couple of days ago, it is finished, it is complete. My hour is here. I have given myself for the sake of the world. There's 6 stone jars, you notice there. By this time, there were only 6 disciples, an imperfect number. 7 is a perfect number, 12 is a perfect number. There are 6 imperfect, not complete. Each jar held 20, 30, 40 gallons, 120, 150 gallons. Used for the Jewish rite of purification, of washing your hands, either dipping your hands in it or splashing their face in it or washing off their feet. It was dirty water. That's still used in the Middle East today, just a jar of water there where you kind of wash up before the meal. Very common jars, ordinary jars, stone jars, just kind of like they have around the house. But what's profound about that is that that's how God works, working through very ordinary things like you and me, like stone jars, like bread and wine. God uses those things as a conduit through which to bring us God's grace. So Jesus says to the disciples, fill them up. To the servants, he says, fill them up. Interesting, because Jesus is calling them to participate in a miracle that will be happening. In the Gospel of John especially, people do things and then something extraordinary happens. Ordinary people do ordinary things. In John, touching the hem of his garment and she is healed. Ripping off a roof, letting him down, all of that stuff, ordinary things, ordinary people in which extraordinary things are done. Now, what's interesting is to ask who knew about the water turning into wine? The disciples, Jesus, the servants, but no one else knows. Not a flashy miracle, not showy, not hocus pocus, but just done. And when the servants drew some out, when they did what they were supposed to do, God did what he was supposed to do and turned that water into wine. That'll happen again and again with the bread and the fish, many other things, the bread and the wine, all when we do what we can do, God does something extraordinary. Also interesting to see Who got to see the miracle taking place? The host? Not really. The groom? Not really. The people at the wedding? No. The people who really knew what had happened were the servants. Were the servants, not the people there. The servants who were dipping, they had just filled it with water up to the brims, nothing left to put in there. And as it's drawn out, they saw in the serving and doing what they were supposed to do, they saw the miracle take place. You know, very similar today. If you want to see miracles, start serving. That's what these servants learned. If you want to see miracles, start serving. How might you see the miracle of God working in your life or in the life of others? Start serving, and you see God at work. So, who gets the credit? Well, the host does. Jesus didn't get the credit. He's not looking for it. All he wants is God's work to be done in the world. And of course, it's another life lesson that it's amazing what you can get done when you don't care who gets the credit. Whether you get it in your serving, whether somebody else gets it, in the serving you see God's miraculous hand at work. So Mary invited the miracle. She showed Jesus a deed and a need and asked him to do something about it. The servants participated in the miracle, in what God was doing. The steward and the guests enjoyed the miracle and drank the wine, and the disciples believed in the miracle worker. That's important for us to do. The disciples believed in this first sign, in the miracle worker. I love that story, the changing of water into wine. You probably know of the teetotaler grandmother. The grandson said, yeah, but Grandma, Jesus made wine at the wedding. And a teetotaler grandma said, oh, that's the one thing I don't like about Jesus. So we're going to close with April 9th from Sarah Young's Jesus Calling. It reads in this way. You are mine for all time. Nothing can separate you from my love. Since I have invested my very life with you, be well assured that I will also take good care of you. When your mind goes into neutral and your thoughts flow freely, you tend to feel anxious and alone. Your focus becomes problem solving. To get your mind back into gear, just turn toward me, bringing yourself and your problems into my presence. Many problems vanish instantly in the light of my love because you realize you are never alone. Other problems may remain, but they become secondary to knowing me and rejoicing in a relationship I freely offer you. Each moment you can choose to practice my presence or to practice the presence of your problems. Practicing the presence of Jesus is so important. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow, on Monday for day 6. Until then, you take care. Bye-bye.